The cabin lights dimmed just enough to signal nighttime over the Atlantic, but it wasn't quite dark. More like that soft gray hour when the world feels suspended between places. Outside, the clouds stretched endlessly, smooth as poured milk under a sky dusted with stars. Inside, the hum of the engines was a steady lullaby, the kind that made even the most restless passengers sink into their seats with a sigh. It was one of those rare flights where everything felt calm, almost peaceful. Nia adjusted the collar of her uniform as she moved quietly down the aisle. She'd been a flight attendant for 11 years, and in that time, she'd learned to read people faster than she could read a safety card. A twitch of the eyebrow, a too tight grip on a drink, the way someone avoided eye contact. Those were the signs she watched for. Not because she was nosy, but because her job wasn't just about serving meals or handing out blankets. It was about keeping people safe, seen, and, when possible, at ease. She didn't wear her experience like a badge, but it showed in the way she moved, smooth, unhurried, always aware. In first class, near the front window, a man sat with his arms crossed, staring out at nothing. He hadn't touched his champagne. He hadn't smiled at the crew. He hadn't even unbuttoned his suit jacket. Everything about him screamed tension, the kind that came from being used to getting his way and not liking delays. Nia had noticed him the moment he boarded. Expensive shoes, sharp haircut, the kind of watch that cost more than her monthly rent. But what stood out more than his clothes was the air around him, impatient, entitled, like the world owed him something and was late on delivery. She'd seen types like him before. Usually they softened after a few hours in the air. The altitude, the routine, the quiet, it had a way of leveling egos. But not this one. When the captain's voice crackled over the intercom warning of unexpected turbulence ahead, Nia moved quickly, checking seatbelts, offering reassurance with a calm voice and steady hands. She reached his row and leaned in slightly. "Sir, could you please fasten your seatbelt? We're expecting some rough air." He didn't look at her, just kept staring out the window. "I'm fine," he said, voice flat. "It's for your safety," she said gently, not backing down but not pushing either. "It's required during turbulence." That's when he turned. His eyes locked onto hers, sharp and cold. "Are you telling me what to do?" he asked, voice low but edged with something dangerous. Nia didn't flinch. "I'm asking you to follow safety protocol, sir. For everyone's safety." A beat of silence. Then, without warning, his hand shot out, a sharp, stinging slap across her cheek. The sound cut through the cabin like a crack of thunder. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. Even the soft clink of glasses in the galley seemed to freeze. For a moment, the world narrowed to that single point of heat on her face. Her breath caught, but she didn't gasp, didn't cry out. She just stood there, blinking once, twice, as if trying to make sense of something that made no sense at all. Around her, passengers shifted uncomfortably. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Another pulled out a phone. Before she could speak, the cockpit door opened. Captain Vance stepped out, drawn by the commotion. He was a tall man with a no-nonsense demeanor, the kind who prided himself on control. His eyes scanned the scene, the stunned passengers, the red mark blooming on Nia's cheek, the man in first class now leaning back like he'd just swatted a fly. "What's going on here?" he asked, voice clipped. Nia opened her mouth to explain, but the man spoke first. "This attendant was being disrespectful, talking down to me like I'm some kind of child." Captain Vance glanced at Nia. She met his gaze, steady, waiting for him to see what had really happened. But instead of asking her side, he frowned slightly and said, "Nia, you know better than to escalate with passengers." The words landed like a second blow. Not because they hurt, though they did, but because they twisted the truth. She hadn't escalated. She'd asked a simple, necessary question. And now, in front of everyone, she was being painted as the problem. She didn't argue, didn't raise her voice. She just nodded once, turned, and walked back toward the galley. Her steps were measured, her posture straight. But inside, something had shifted. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was clarity, a cold, hard understanding that in this moment, her dignity meant less to them than his comfort. And that realization lit a fuse she didn't know she had. In the galley, she took a slow breath, pressing her fingers lightly against her cheek. It stung, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the humiliation. Still, she didn't let it show. She smoothed her uniform, tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and checked the drink cart. Routine, control. Those were her anchors. But as she stood there, listening to the muffled murmurs from the cabin, watching through the curtain as the man leaned back with a satisfied smirk, she made a decision, not out of rage but out of principle. If they thought she'd vanish quietly, they didn't know her at all, because Nia had spent years learning how to navigate the skies, how to read the unspoken, how to turn chaos into calm. And now, for the first time, she was going to use that knowledge not just to serve, but to protect herself. To make sure that what happened in the next few hours wouldn't be forgotten, brushed aside, or blamed on her. The plane continued its path over the ocean, steady and silent. But beneath the surface, something had changed. The calm was gone, and in its place was a quiet storm, one that would touch down long before they reached London. The galley was small, barely enough room for two people to stand side by side, but in that moment it felt like the only safe place left on the plane. Nia leaned against the cool metal counter, her fingers still lightly pressed to her cheek. The sting hadn't faded, but it wasn't the pain that held her attention. It was the silence that followed. Not the quiet of the cabin, but the silence inside her own head, sharp and focused, like everything else had fallen away except for one clear thought. This ends differently. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. Instead, she took a slow breath, then another, until her heartbeat settled into something steady again. Years of training kicked in, not just airline protocol, but the kind of street-smart awareness she'd learned growing up in a neighborhood where respect wasn't given freely. And dignity had to be defended quietly, carefully, and sometimes without saying a word. She glanced at the cabin through the gap in the curtain. The man was now reclined fully, sipping water like nothing had happened. A few passengers still stole glances his way, some with narrowed eyes, others with uneasy smiles, pretending they hadn't seen anything. The captain had returned to the cockpit without another word to her. That stung more than the slap, being made invisible by the very people who were supposed to have her back. But Nia wasn't waiting for backup. She knew better. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. Airplane mode, of course, but she didn't need a signal. She opened a secure messaging app she used only for emergencies, the kind that auto-deleted messages after reading. Her thumbs moved quickly, deliberately. She typed a short note to a contact she'd met years ago at an aviation safety conference in Geneva, a woman who now worked with the UK Civil Aviation Authority. The message was simple. VIP passenger, Flight 482, just assaulted a crew member. Name, Darius Thorne. Landing in 90 minutes. Expect media interest. Handled discreetly. She hit send, knowing the message would queue until they landed and reconnected. Then she opened another tab, her airline's internal crew portal. With a few taps, she flagged an unruly passenger incident and requested ground security meet the aircraft upon arrival. She didn't exaggerate. She didn't dramatize. She just stated the facts. Passenger refused safety instruction, physically struck flight attendant in front of witnesses. Captain failed to intervene appropriately. That done, she tucked the phone away and turned to the drink cart, adjusting bottles with practiced hands. To anyone watching, she looked like she was just doing her job. But inside, her mind was racing ahead, connecting dots only she could see. She remembered reading about him months ago, a profile in a business magazine she'd flipped through during a layover. Self-made billionaire, tech disruptor, philanthropist on paper, but with whispers of lawsuits buried in footnotes. He'd just bought a major British fintech company, and there were rumors he was angling for a knighthood or some kind of government advisory role. That meant image was everything to him. Reputation wasn't just valuable, it was his entire currency. And right now that reputation was sitting in seat 1A, completely unaware that the woman he'd slapped wasn't just going to walk away. Nia walked back into the cabin, tray in hand, offering water to passengers who suddenly seemed eager to meet her eyes, to nod with quiet sympathy. One elderly woman gently touched her arm and whispered, "You okay, love?" Nia gave her a small, genuine smile. "I will be," she said softly. Back in first class, the man didn't look up when she approached. She didn't offer him anything. She didn't need to. She just stood there for a second, long enough for him to feel her presence, then moved on. No drama, no confrontation. Just presence, calm, unshaken, and utterly in control. In the next few minutes, she made 3 more quiet moves. First, she signaled to another flight attendant, a younger woman named Layla, With a subtle hand gesture they'd developed over years of working together, Layla nodded almost imperceptibly and began casually chatting with passengers near the front, gently encouraging them to maybe not post anything yet, but if you do, just be honest about what you saw. It wasn't instruction, it was suggestion. And in the age of smartphones, suggestion was often enough. Second, Nia checked the flight manifest again on her tablet, confirmed his full name, his company, his listed address in London. Then she opened a private browser window and pulled up his company's investor page, upcoming events, press appearances, a major tech summit in 2 days, where he was scheduled to give the keynote address. She noted the date, the venue, the sponsors. All public information, all useful. Third, she did something small but critical. She made eye contact with a man in business class who'd been filming the whole thing on his phone. Not a demand, not a plea. Just a look, steady, knowing, and a slight tilt of her head toward the aisle. He hesitated, then gave a tiny nod. She didn't ask him to delete it. She didn't ask him to share it. She just let him know she saw him. And sometimes that was all it took for someone to choose the right side. By now the plane had leveled out. The turbulence warning light switched off. Passengers relaxed again, but the mood had shifted. There was a new kind of tension in the air. Not fear, but anticipation. Like everyone sensed something was coming, even if they couldn't name it. Nia returned to the galley and poured herself a glass of water. Her hands didn't tremble. Her breath was even. She wasn't thinking about revenge, not in the way movies show it, with shouting and slamming doors. This wasn't about hurting him back. It was about making sure what he did had consequences. Real ones. Not just a slap on the wrist, not a quiet apology and a first-class upgrade on the next flight. She wanted accountability. And in a world where powerful people often got to rewrite the rules, she was going to make sure this time the truth stayed visible. She glanced at her watch. Less than 2 hours to landing. 2 hours to prepare the ground before they even touched it. Outside, the sky began to lighten at the edges. Dawn was coming. And with it, a new kind of reckoning. One that wouldn't be shouted, but seen. Shared. Believed. Nia took a sip of water, set the glass down, and smoothed her uniform one last time. She wasn't just a flight attendant anymore. In those 2 minutes, she'd become something else, a witness, a strategist, and quietly a force. And she was ready. The wheels touched down with a soft thud, then a rumble as the plane slowed along the wet tarmac of London Heathrow. Rain streaked the windows, blurring the rows of terminal lights into golden smears. Inside the cabin, passengers stirred, stretching, gathering bags, switching off screens. To most, it was just another landing, routine, uneventful. But for one man in first class, the real turbulence was just beginning. He stood as soon as the seatbelt sign blinked off, adjusting his cufflinks with the same calm confidence he'd worn since boarding. He expected a private car waiting curbside. Maybe a handler with an umbrella, certainly no delays. After all, people like him didn't wait. They were met. Nia watched from the galley as he gathered his things, his movements brisk, self-assured. He didn't glance her way, didn't seem to remember the slap or the silence that followed. To him, it was already forgotten, just a minor irritation like a slow barista or a delayed train. But Nia knew better. What happened in the air didn't stay in the air. Not this time. As the cabin door opened and the jet bridge connected, a different kind of energy seeped in. Not the usual rush of ground crew or cheerful greetings, but a quiet, deliberate presence. 2 airport security officers in dark uniforms stepped aboard, polite but firm. They didn't head for the back. They walked straight to the front. "Mr. Thorne," one asked, voice neutral, "could we have a word before you disembark?" The man frowned. "Is there a problem?" "Just a routine matter regarding passenger conduct during flight." "Won't take long." A ripple went through the cabin. Passengers paused mid-aisle. Phones came out again, not just from curiosity, but because people sensed this wasn't normal. Nia stayed back near the service area, watching but not interfering. She didn't need to. The stage was already set. Outside, more figures waited. Plainclothes officers, a woman in a sharp blazer holding a tablet, and further back near the terminal entrance, a small cluster of journalists. They weren't shouting. They weren't pushing. They just stood there, cameras ready, eyes alert. Word had spread fast. Not through official channels, but through the quiet network of people who'd seen it happen. Passengers texting friends, crew members calling contacts, a single video clip sent to the right inbox at the right time. Within minutes, the footage was online, not edited, not dramatized. Just shaky phone video, a calm request, a sudden slap, a stunned silence. It lasted 12 seconds, but in today's world, 12 seconds was enough to change everything. By the time the man finally stepped off the plane, escorted, not arrested but clearly not free to leave as he pleased, the video had been shared over 50,000 times. Comments poured in. That's not passenger frustration, that's assault. Flight attendants aren't servants. Why is the pilot not saying anything? News outlets picked it up within the hour. Not as gossip, but as a story about power, accountability, and the invisible labor that keeps the world moving. Nia didn't speak to reporters at first. She stayed with her crew, helping with post-flight checks, answering a few quiet questions from airline supervisors who now looked at her with something closer to respect than suspicion. When a young journalist finally approached her near the crew exit, notebook in hand, she didn't give a long statement. Just 3 sentences spoken calmly without anger. I asked him to fasten his seatbelt for safety. He hit me. I serve with dignity. I expect the same in return. Those words spread faster than the video. Back in the terminal, the man's team scrambled. Calls were made. Lawyers were summoned. A PR representative issued a vague statement about misunderstandings in high-stress environments and Mr. Thorne's deep respect for service professionals. But it was too late. The public didn't buy it, not when the video showed clear, unprovoked violence, not when dozens of passengers confirmed the same story. His company's social media pages were flooded. Customers canceled subscriptions. A major investor tweeted, "We do not tolerate abuse of any kind." His upcoming keynote at the tech summit? The organizers posted a short update. Mr. Thorne's participation is under review pending further information. Meanwhile, Nia went home. Not to fanfare, not to cameras, but to her small flat in West London where her cat greeted her at the door and the kettle was still warm from her morning tea. She took a long shower, washed the flight out of her hair, and sat by the window with a cup of chamomile. The city lights blinked below, ordinary and alive. She felt tired, yes, but also lighter, like something heavy had been lifted. She checked her phone once. Not for headlines, but for messages from friends, from fellow crew members, from strangers who'd seen the video and just wanted to say, "Thank you for not staying quiet." The next morning, the story was everywhere. Not just in tabloids, but in serious business journals and morning talk shows. Experts debated workplace safety for service workers. Unions called for stronger protections. Airlines issued new guidelines. And through it all, Nia's name kept coming up, not as a victim, but as someone who'd stood her ground without losing her composure. She gave one more interview that afternoon to a documentary team working on a series about dignity and labor. She spoke slowly, thoughtfully. "People think flying is glamorous," she said, "but most of us are just trying to do a hard job with grace. When someone takes that grace for weakness, they're wrong. And sometimes the quietest response is the loudest." By evening, the man had issued a formal apology, public, detailed, and for the first time, without excuses. He admitted fault. He accepted consequences. He even donated to a fund for crew safety training. It wasn't redemption, not yet. But it was a start, and Nia? She didn't celebrate. She didn't gloat. She just got ready for her next flight, because the sky doesn't stop calling, and neither does she. The apology made headlines, but it didn't fix everything. Words on a screen, even carefully chosen ones, couldn't erase the sting of that slap, or the months of damage control that followed for the man who delivered it. At first, his team thought a public mea culpa would be enough. A donation here, a statement there, maybe a quiet meeting with the airline, and life would go back to normal. But the world had changed while he was in the air, and the ground he landed on wasn't as forgiving as it used to be. Within days, the ripple effects began to show. His company's stock, already shaky from rumors of internal tension, dropped another 12%. Not because of the slap alone, but because investors started asking harder questions. If a man could lose control like that in public, what else was he? Hiding? What happened behind closed doors? The narrative shifted from isolated incident to pattern of behavior. Former employees, emboldened by the attention, began sharing stories, some about harsh management, others about dismissive comments, a few about outright disrespect. None were explosive on their own, but together, they painted a picture that no PR team could easily scrub away. Then came the regulators. The British FinTech Authority, already reviewing his recent acquisition, announced a formal inquiry into corporate governance and leadership conduct. It wasn't a criminal investigation, yet, but it was serious. In the world of high finance, reputation wasn't just about image, it was about trust. And trust, once cracked, was nearly impossible to rebuild. His board called an emergency meeting, not in a sleek conference room with floor-to-ceiling views, but over a secure video line, voices tense, faces unreadable. They didn't accuse him outright. They didn't need to. They simply laid out the facts. Sponsors were pulling out of the tech summit, 3 major clients had paused contracts, and 2 key executives had quietly updated their LinkedIn profiles. The message was clear. The brand was bleeding, and he was the wound. "You built this," one board member said gently. "But right now you're also the liability." He argued at first. Said the media was blowing things out of proportion. Said one mistake shouldn't define a lifetime of work. But even as he spoke, he knew it wasn't just about the slap. It was about the arrogance behind it, the assumption that he could treat someone as disposable and face no real consequences. That belief, more than the act itself, was what people couldn't forgive. In the end, he agreed to step back, not resign. Officially, he was taking a personal leave of absence to reflect and recharge. But everyone knew what it meant. He was being sidelined, not fired, but contained. His access to company communications was limited. His name was removed from upcoming press materials. Even his office was quietly cleared out by an assistant who didn't meet his eyes. Back in London, Nia heard bits and pieces through news alerts and messages from colleagues. She didn't seek updates, she didn't gloat, but she didn't ignore it either. Because this wasn't just about him, it was about what his fall represented. For years, people in service roles had been told to smile through it, to pick your battles, to remember who signs your paycheck. But what if the person signing the paycheck was wrong? What if the battle was worth fighting, not for revenge but for respect? Her airline, which had initially hesitated to take a strong stance, now publicly honored her. Not with a trophy or a bonus, but with action. New training modules on de-escalation, a direct hotline for crew to report abuse without fear of retaliation, and a policy update that made it clear physical or verbal aggression towards staff would result in immediate bans and legal follow-up. Other airlines followed. Within weeks, the entire industry was talking about the NIA standard, though she never asked for her name attached to it. Still, not everything changed overnight. Some passengers still acted entitled. Some managers still prioritized customer satisfaction over staff safety, but something had shifted in the air, literally and figuratively. Crew members stood a little taller. Passengers thought twice before raising their voices. And when another incident happened a month later on a different flight, a businessman yelling at a flight attendant over a missing pillow, it was the other passengers who intervened, saying, "That's not okay. Stop." Nia saw that video too. And for the first time, she allowed herself a small, quiet smile. Meanwhile, the man who'd once commanded boardrooms and private jets found himself in unfamiliar territory. Silence. No calls from investors. No invitations to panels. No flattering profiles in magazines. Just the hum of his own thoughts and the weight of consequences he couldn't outrun with money or influence. He tried to stay busy, reading, walking, even volunteering at a local food bank. But the world he'd built felt distant now, like watching a party through a window. He reached out once, not to the press, but directly to Nia. A handwritten letter delivered through the airline's HR department. No excuses, no requests for forgiveness, just a simple acknowledgement. What I did was wrong. I'm working to understand why I thought it was acceptable. I hope in time I can earn back the trust I broke. Not just with you, but with everyone I let down. She read it once, then folded it carefully and put it in a drawer. She didn't reply, not because she was cruel, but because healing wasn't her responsibility. Accountability was his to carry. As the weeks passed, she noticed something else. More women, especially women of color, reaching out to her. Not just flight attendants, but nurses, teachers, hotel staff, retail workers. They shared their own stories of being spoken over, touched without consent, told to lighten up. They didn't want her to fix it. They just wanted to know they weren't alone. And that, more than any headline, made her realize the true impact of what had happened. It wasn't about one slap. It was about breaking the silence that protected people who thought they were above the rules. By the time autumn arrived, the man had sold his London penthouse and moved to a quieter town up north. His company stabilized under interim leadership and slowly, cautiously, began to rebuild. He wasn't gone forever, but he was changed. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Nia, meanwhile, kept flying. Same uniform, same calm voice, same steady hands. But now, when she walked down the aisle, passengers looked at her differently, not with pity, but with quiet respect. And when turbulence hit, and she asked someone to fasten their seatbelt, they did so without question, because by then everyone understood. Respect wasn't optional. It was the only thing that kept us all from falling. 6 months had passed since that flight, and the world kept turning. Planes still took off, passengers still boarded, and clouds still drifted lazily over oceans. But something had changed beneath the surface. The kind of shift you couldn't measure with numbers but could feel in the air. Like the quiet hum before a storm clears. For Nia, life hadn't become louder or flashier. If anything, it had grown deeper, richer in ways she hadn't expected. She still wore the same uniform, still walked the same aisles, still offered the same warm good morning to bleary-eyed travelers at 5 a.m. But now, when she spoke, people listened, not because she demanded it, but because they'd seen what happened when someone didn't. Her voice carried a quiet weight, not from anger, but from the kind of calm that comes after standing your ground and not breaking. The airline had promoted her, not to management, which she'd politely declined, but to a new role, crew liaison for safety and dignity initiatives. It wasn't a title she'd asked for, but one she accepted because it meant real change. She helped design workshops where flight attendants practiced setting boundaries without fear. She sat in on policy meetings where, for the first time, frontline voices shaped decisions instead of just following them. And she made sure every new hire heard the same message. Your safety matters as much as the passengers. Outside the airline, her impact rippled further. A group of service workers, hotel staff, bus drivers, restaurant servers reached out after seeing her speak at a labor forum. They didn't want a hero. They wanted a blueprint. So together, they launched a small nonprofit, the Dignity Collective. No fancy offices, no glossy brochures, just a shared mission to support workers facing disrespect on the job. They offered legal referrals, emotional support, and most importantly, a place to be believed. Nia didn't run it alone. She never wanted to. She simply showed up, listened, and reminded others, you don't have to endure to be professional. The man from that flight, he stayed out of the spotlight. No interviews, no comeback tours. But quietly, through his foundation, he began funding workplace respect programs in industries he'd once overlooked. Janitorial services, delivery logistics, elder care. He never mentioned Nia by name, but those close to the projects noticed the timing. It wasn't redemption in the dramatic sense, but something quieter. Accountability turned into action. Nia didn't track his progress. She didn't need to. What mattered wasn't whether he'd changed for her. It was whether he'd changed at all. One crisp Saturday morning, she stood on a small stage in a community center in East London, addressing a room full of young people training for careers in hospitality and transport. Most were nervous, wide-eyed, clutching notebooks like shields. She didn't give a polished speech. She just told them the truth. I used to think being professional meant never showing frustration, she said, hands resting lightly on the podium. That if I stayed calm, smiled through rudeness, and never raised my voice, I'd be respected. But I learned something hard that day at 38,000 feet. Respect isn't earned by silence. It's claimed by standing in your truth, even when your hands are shaking. Afterward, a teenager with braids and a nervous smile approached her. "Did you ever regret not walking away?" she asked softly. Nia thought for a moment. "No," she said. "Because walking away wouldn't have changed anything for the next person. Sometimes staying is the bravest thing you can do." Back home that evening, she made tea and sat by the window watching rain tap gently against the glass. Her phone buzzed. A message from a fellow flight attendant in Nairobi, who just used the new reporting protocol after a passenger made threatening remarks. "It worked," the message read. "They met him at the gate." "Thank you," Nia smiled and typed back. "You did the hard part. I'm proud of you." She didn't post about it. Didn't share screenshots or seek praise. That wasn't the point. The point was that the system was working, not perfectly but better than before. And that was enough. Her next flight was to Toronto. As she packed her bag, extra socks, a good book, her lucky scarf, she thought about the passengers she'd meet. Some would be kind. Some would be tired. A few might be difficult, but none of them would find her unprepared. Not because she carried anger, but because she carried clarity. On the plane the next morning, as the engines roared to life and the runway stretched ahead, she moved through the cabin with the same grace as always. When a businessman in seat 12C snapped at her for bringing the wrong brand of sparkling water, she didn't flinch. She simply met his eyes and said, "I'll get you the one you prefer, but please speak to me like I'm a person, not a machine." He blinked, then muttered an apology. She nodded and walked on. Later, during smooth cruising altitude, a little girl in economy tugged her sleeve. "Are you the lady from the video?" she whispered. Nia knelt slightly. "I am." "My mom says you're brave," the girl said, eyes wide. "I'm just someone who believed I deserved to be treated kindly," Nia replied. "And so do you." The girl beamed and handed her a folded piece of paper, a drawing of a woman in a blue uniform with wings. "For you," she said. Nia tucked it into her pocket right over her heart. As the plane banked gently over the Atlantic, sunlight spilling through the windows, she looked out at the endless blue below. No grand speeches. No dramatic music. Just the steady rhythm of work, purpose, and quiet courage. She wasn't famous. She didn't want to be. But she was free. Free from the fear that speaking up would cost her everything. And in that freedom she'd found something rare. Peace. Because in the end it was never about revenge. It was about making sure no one else had to choose between their dignity and their job. And as long as she kept flying, kept speaking, kept showing up, that mission would stay alive. Not with a bang, but with 1,000 small acts of courage, one flight at a time.